Hello there everyone, welcome to Shadowman Stories. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Daniel Crenshaw and I have been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 19 years. I've seen things that would make most people pack up and leave Kentucky forever. But this one still keeps me awake at night. It was June 1957, and the summer heat was already making the caves sweat. I'd been working the Red River Gorge area since 1938, back when my daddy first brought me out here as a boy. My grandfather worked these same woods in the 1920s, and he used to tell stories that I thought were just tall tales. Stories about things that shouldn't exist. Hunting in the dark places where the sun never reaches. I should have listened better. The limestone caves in our area run deep, real deep. Some of them connect to underground rivers that flow all the way to the Ohio. When the water's high like it was that summer, you can hear it rushing through the rock like a distant train. But that June, I started hearing other sounds too. Sounds that didn't belong. My wife Sarah always said I was too serious about my work. "Danny," she'd say, "you act like those woods are your personal responsibility." She was right, I guess. Being a third-generation ranger does that to you. When your grandfather and father both worked the same territory, you feel like you're carrying on something important, something that matters. I had 3 kids at home. Tommy was 12, little Beth was 8, and baby Sarah was just 2. Every morning when I put on my uniform, I thought about keeping the forest safe for families like mine. Families who came here to camp and hike and see God's creation. I took that seriously. But by June of '57, families weren't coming anymore. It started with the Henderson farm, about 3 miles from the main cave entrance. Old Pete Henderson called me up one morning, voice shaking like a leaf. "Danny," he said, "you need to get out here. Something's wrong with my cattle, real wrong." I drove out there expecting to find sick animals, maybe something they ate that disagreed with them. Pete met me at the gate, and I could see right away he was scared, really scared. Pete Henderson was a tough old farmer who'd fought in the war and raised 6 kids on that land. I'd never seen him afraid of anything. "They're all dead," he said. 12 head of cattle, all dead. But Danny, they ain't torn up, they ain't eaten, they're just ... empty. I followed him to the pasture, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. 12 cattle, all lying peaceful like on the grass. No signs of struggle, no torn fences, no predator tracks, but each one had 2 small holes in the neck, about 3 inches apart, and when I touched them, they felt like empty sacks. "There's no blood anywhere," Pete whispered, "not a drop. It's like something just ... drained them." I'd seen plenty of predator kills in my time, bears, coyotes, even the occasional mountain lion. But this was different. This was impossible. Nothing drains that much blood from an animal without making a mess. Nothing leaves 12 full-grown cattle looking like they just laid down for a nap and never woke up. "When did you find them?" I asked. "This morning. They were fine yesterday evening when I brought them in. Whatever did this, it happened during the night." I spent 2 hours examining those cattle. I measured the puncture wounds, took notes, looked for any sign of what might have done this. The holes were too big for snake fangs, too small for any predator I knew. And there was something else, a smell around the bodies. Not the smell of death, but something else. Something that reminded me of the deep caves, where the air never moves and the darkness is complete. That night, I called my supervisor in Frankfurt. "Bill," I said, "I need to report something strange out here." "What kind of strange?" I told him about the cattle, about the blood, about the smell. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "Danny," he said finally, "I need you to keep this quiet for now. We've had similar reports from 3 other counties. Whatever's happening, it's not just your area." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to make sense of it. Sarah was putting the kids to bed, and I could hear her reading them a story. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But outside, the forest was too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to be holding their breath. I thought about my grandfather's stories, about the time in 1923 when livestock started dying in the same way, about the thing he claimed to see in the caves, about how the killings stopped just as suddenly as they started. and didn't happen again for 30 years. It had been years since 1923. The next morning, I got 3 more calls. The Morrison farm, the Garrett place, and the old Whitfield homestead. Same story every time. Dead livestock, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just those 2 small holes in the neck. I called my supervisor back. "Bill, it's happening all over the county. We need help. Help's on the way. I'm sending William Ashford down from Lexington. He's got experience with ... unusual cases." Will Ashford arrived that afternoon in a government truck loaded with equipment I'd never seen before. He was about my age, maybe a little younger, with the kind of pale skin that said he spent more time indoors than most rangers. But his eyes were sharp, and he knew his business. "How many animals so far?" he asked as we shook hands. 43 in the last 2 days, all with the same marks. "Any human casualties?" The question caught me off guard. Human casualties? This is an animal attack, isn't it? Will gave me a look that made my stomach drop. Maybe, maybe not. Let's go examine the scene. We drove out to the Henderson farm first. The cattle were still there. Pete was afraid to move them until we gave him the okay. Will walked around them slowly, taking pictures with a camera that seemed too fancy for Forest Service work. He knelt down next to one of the cows and examined the puncture wounds with a magnifying glass. "Spacing is consistent," he muttered. "Depth suggests incredible jaw strength. But look at this." He pointed to the edge of the wound. "The flesh is cauterized. Whatever made these holes, it was hot. Very hot. What kind of animal has hot fangs? That's the question, isn't it?" Will stood up and looked toward the tree line. "Show me the caves." We drove to the main cave entrance, a hole in the limestone cliff that most tourists never found. I'd been exploring these caves since I was a boy, but I'd never gone too deep. The passages got narrow and twisted, and it was easy to get lost, but Will seemed eager to get underground. "You ever notice anything unusual about these caves?" he asked, as we geared up with flashlights and rope. "Like what?" "Sounds, smells, areas that seem ... wrong." I thought about it. "There's a chamber, about half a mile in, where the air doesn't move right, and sometimes you can hear things that don't make sense, like wings flapping, but there's no bats." Will nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Let's start there." The cave entrance was cool and damp, with the familiar smell of limestone and wet earth. But as we went deeper, walking single file through passages that were barely wide enough for one person, I started to notice something else. That same smell I'd detected around the dead cattle. Musty and metallic, like old blood mixed with something animal. "You smell that?" I asked. "Yeah, it's stronger up ahead." We reached the chamber I'd mentioned, a room about the size of a small barn with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our heads. Our flashlights seemed dimmer here, the beams not reaching as far as they should. But what we saw in that weak light made us both stop dead. Bones, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all arranged in neat piles around the edges of the chamber. Cow bones, sheep bones, bones from animals I couldn't identify, and they were old. Some of them looked like they'd been there for decades. "This is a feeding ground," Will whispered. "Something's been bringing kills here for years. What kind of animal hoards bones like this?" "I don't think it's an animal." Before I could ask what he meant, we heard it. A sound like leather flapping, but bigger than any bat I'd ever heard. The sound was coming from above us, from the darkness beyond our lights. "We need to go," Will said quietly. Now, we backed toward the entrance, keeping our lights pointed up. The flapping sound got closer, and I caught a glimpse of something moving in the darkness. Something big, something that didn't belong in any cave. We made it back to the surface, but barely. Behind us, the flapping sound followed us all the way to the entrance, stopping just at the edge of daylight. "What was that?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. Will was pale, even paler than before. "I think we just found our livestock killer." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bones, hundreds of them, arranged like some kind of altar, and I kept hearing that sound, leather wings in the darkness, hunting for something to feed on. Sarah noticed I was restless. "Bad day at work." "Something like that. You want to talk about it?" I looked at her, sleeping peacefully beside me, and thought about our children in the next room. How could I tell her that something was living in the caves near our home? Something that had been killing livestock for years, maybe decades. Something that was getting bolder. "Just some sick animals," I said. Nothing to worry about. But I was worried, real worried, because I had the feeling that whatever was in those caves was done hiding. Will wanted to go back into the caves the next morning, but I convinced him to wait for backup equipment. We spent the day visiting more farms, documenting more dead livestock. By sunset, we had counted over 60 animals, killed in the same way, all drained of blood, all with those 2 perfect puncture wounds. It's accelerating, Will said as we drove back to town. The pattern is changing. What do you mean? First night, 12 cattle. Second night, 20. Last night, 27. It's not just feeding anymore. It's stockpiling. I didn't like the sound of that. Stockpiling for what? Winter, breeding season. I don't know. But something's changed. We got back to my office just as the sun was setting. The phone was ringing when we walked in. Danny. It was Pete Henderson, and he sounded scared. You need to get out here. Something's happened to the Morrison family. The Morrison farm was only 2 miles from the Henderson place. When we got there, the front door was standing wide open, and all the lights were on, but the house was silent. I called out, Jack, Mary, anyone home? No answer. We found them in the kitchen. Jack Morrison, his wife Mary, and their 2 teenage boys, all sitting around the dinner table like they were having a normal meal, but their eyes were staring at nothing, and their skin was white as paper. Dear God, I whispered. Will checked each of them for a pulse. Nothing, and each one had the same 2 puncture wounds in the neck. But unlike the animals, these bodies weren't completely drained. There was still blood pooled under the skin, like whatever had done this had been interrupted. Where's the little girl? Will asked. I looked around the kitchen. The Morrison had 3 kids, 16-year-old Tom, 14-year-old Billy, and 7-year-old Rebecca. Tom and Billy were at the table with their parents, but Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. We searched the house top to bottom. Her bedroom was empty, but the window was open and the screen was torn. Outside, we found small droplets of blood leading from the house toward the tree line. It took her, I said. The thing took Rebecca. Will was already following the blood trail with his flashlight. The trail leads toward the caves. We followed those drops of blood through the woods, moving as fast as we dared in the darkness. My flashlight kept flickering, the battery draining faster than it should. Will's light was doing the same thing. Something's wrong with the equipment, he said. It's like the batteries are being drained. We reached the cave entrance just as our lights died completely, but we didn't need them to see. There was a glow coming from inside the cave, a sick green light that made my skin crawl. We need to go in, I said. That little girl might still be alive. Danny, we don't know what we're dealing with. We should wait for backup. There's no time. She's only 7 years old. Will looked at the cave entrance, then back at me. Okay, but we go in armed. I had my service revolver, and Will had brought a shotgun from his truck. We also grabbed 2 emergency flashlights from the glove compartment, smaller ones that might last longer. Then we headed into the cave. The green glow was coming from deeper in the cave system, from passages I'd never explored. We followed it through narrow tunnels that seemed to go on forever. The walls were damp and cold, and that musty smell was getting stronger. Listen, Will whispered. I stopped and listened. In the distance, I could hear a child crying. Rebecca Morrison, somewhere in the darkness ahead of us. We moved faster, following the sound and the green light. The passage opened into a chamber much larger than the one we'd found the day before. This one had a ceiling that stretched up into darkness, and walls covered with what looked like scratch marks. But it was what was in the center of the chamber that made my blood freeze. Rebecca Morrison was there, but she wasn't alone. Standing over her was something that shouldn't exist. It looked like a man, but it was too tall, too thin. Its skin was gray and leathery, and when it turned to look at us, I saw eyes that glowed with their own light, and its mouth was full of teeth, with 2 long fangs that dripped with something that wasn't saliva. Don't move, it said, and its voice was like gravel. The child is mine. I raised my gun, but my hand was shaking. Let her go. The thing smiled, showing more teeth than any mouth should hold. You don't understand. This is my home. You are the intruders. What are you? I am what I have always been. Hunter, feeder, survivor. Your kind has a name for me, but you use it for the wrong creatures. You think I live in the desert, drink from goats, but I am older than your stories. I am the one who taught your ancestors to fear the dark, the chupacabra. My grandfather's stories came flooding back. The thing that hunted in the caves, that disappeared for decades at a time, only to return when the cycle was right. The child, I said, keeping my gun trained on the creature. She's just a little girl. She is young, fresh. She will last longer than the others. That's when I noticed the walls around us. They weren't just scratched, they were decorated with bones, human bones, some old, some new, some so small they could only have come from children. You've been doing this for years, I said, killing families, taking kids, every generation. When the hunger comes, I feed. When I have fed enough, I sleep. It is the natural order. Will stepped forward, shotgun ready. The natural order doesn't include murdering children. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think your weapons can hurt me? I have been shot before. I have been burned, stabbed, poisoned. I heal. I endure. I survive. That's when Rebecca Morrison looked up at us. She was pale and weak, but she was alive. Help me, she whispered. The creature moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. 1 second it was standing over Rebecca. The next it was in front of Will, its claws raking across his chest. Will screamed and fired the shotgun, but the creature was already moving, climbing up the wall like a spider. Run, Will shouted, blood pouring from his wounds. Get the girl and run. I grabbed Rebecca and headed for the passage, but the creature dropped from the ceiling, landing between us and the exit. Its eyes were glowing brighter now, and when it smiled, I saw that its teeth were covered in Will's blood. No one leaves, it said. No one tells the story. No one warns the next generation. Behind me, I could hear Will moving, trying to reload his shotgun, but he was hurt bad, and we were trapped in a cave with something that had been killing people for longer than I'd been alive. That's when I remembered my grandfather's stories, not just about the creature, but about how he'd survived his encounter with it, the thing that had saved his life and might save ours. The creature moved toward us, and I could see it was savoring the moment. It had us trapped, and it knew it. But as it got closer, I noticed something. Around its neck, it wore what looked like a necklace made of small bones, and hanging from that necklace was a small cross, blackened with age. You wear a cross, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The creature stopped and looked down at its necklace. A trophy from a priest who thought his god could protect him. But you kept it. I keep many things, reminders of meals, memories of the hunt. I thought about my grandfather's story, about how he'd survived, about what he'd used to drive the creature away. My grandfather met you before. In 1923, the creature tilted its head, studying me. Your grandfather, Daniel Crenshaw, he was a ranger too. He found your feeding ground, just like we did, but he got away. Many have tried to escape. Few succeed. He had something you were afraid of, something that made you back down. The creature's eyes narrowed. Your grandfather was lucky. Nothing more, but I could see doubt in those glowing eyes. My grandfather had carried a small Bible with him everywhere he went, and he'd always said that faith was the strongest weapon. Against the darkness, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small Bible I'd carried since I was a boy. My grandfather had given it to me when I first became a ranger, telling me it would keep me safe. I'd never really believed him until now. The creature saw the Bible and stepped back. Superstition, ignorance. Your book has no power here. Then, why are you backing away? I opened the Bible and started reading from Psalm 23, the way my grandfather had taught me. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The creature hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. The green glow in its eyes flickered, and for the first time it looked uncertain. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Stop, the creature said, but its voice was weaker now. Stop, or I will kill the child. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The creature screamed and lunged at me, but something was wrong. It moved slower than before, and when it got close to the Bible, it jerked back like it had been burned. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Behind me, I heard Will getting to his feet. He was hurt, but he was alive, and he was raising his shotgun. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. The creature was backing toward the wall now, its eyes wild with fear and rage. This is my domain, my hunting ground. You cannot drive me away with words. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Will fired the shotgun, and this time the creature couldn't dodge. The blast caught it in the chest, spinning it around. But instead of falling, it climbed up the wall and disappeared into the darkness above. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. The green glow was fading now, replaced by normal darkness. I could hear the creature moving above us, but it was retreating, going deeper into the cave system. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I closed the Bible and picked up Rebecca. She was unconscious but breathing. We had to get out of there before the creature decided to come back. Can you walk? I asked Will. I think so, but we need to move fast. That thing isn't gone, just hurt. We made our way back through the cave system, following the passage toward the entrance. Behind us, I could hear the creature calling out, its voice echoing through the stone chambers. I will find you, it said. I will find your families, your children. I will make you watch as I drain them dry. But its voice was getting fainter, and I knew we were going to make it out. The Bible had worked, just like my grandfather said it would. Faith was stronger than fear. Light was stronger than darkness. We reached the cave entrance just as the sun was coming up. The morning light felt like salvation, and I could see that the creature wasn't following us anymore. It was a thing of darkness, and the daylight was its enemy. Will collapsed as soon as we got outside. His wounds were bad, but not fatal. Rebecca was weak from blood loss, but she was alive. We'd gotten her out in time. We need to seal the cave, Will said, as I helped him to the truck. Make sure that thing can't get out. How? Dynamite. We'll bring it down, block the entrance, trap it inside. I looked back at the cave mouth, thinking about the creature somewhere in the darkness beyond. What if there are other entrances? Then we'll find them and seal them too. But first, we need to get you two to a hospital. As we drove away, I could see other rangers arriving with equipment. Word had gotten out about what happened at the Morrison farm, and now everyone wanted answers. But I knew they'd never believe the truth. They'd come up with some rational explanation. Gas leak, food poisoning, mass hysteria, anything but the real story. That afternoon, they brought in enough dynamite to bring down half the mountain. The explosion could be heard for miles, and when the dust settled, the cave entrance was buried under tons of rock. The creature was trapped inside, if it was still alive. But I knew it wasn't over. Things like that don't die easy. And my grandfather had told me that they were patient. They could wait decades for their chance to hunt again. That was 30 years ago, and I'm still a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest. I never stopped carrying my grandfather's Bible, and I never stopped watching for signs, because I know the truth. Some things are too evil to die, too hungry to stay buried forever. Rebecca Morrison recovered from her injuries, but she never spoke about what happened in the cave. Her parents were given a military funeral, and the official report blamed their deaths on a gas leak that caused hallucinations. The town accepted that explanation because it was easier than believing the truth. Will Ashford disappeared 3 months after the cave was sealed. His superiors said he'd been transferred to another assignment, but I knew better. Men like Will don't just disappear unless something makes them disappear. I think he went looking for other caves, other creatures. I think he found them. The Henderson farm was abandoned after that summer. So was the Morrison place. People said the land was cursed, and maybe they were right. But I knew the real reason families stopped living there. The creature might be trapped, but its influence lingered. The fear it had planted in people's hearts didn't die with the cave entrance. I kept monitoring the area, checking for signs that the creature had found another way out. For years, everything seemed quiet. No more livestock deaths, no more strange sounds in the night. I started to think maybe we'd really killed it, or at least trapped it permanently. Then, in 1987, exactly 30 years after the cave was sealed, it started again. A farmer named Jake Whitmore called me early one morning, his voice shaking with the same fear I'd heard in Pete Henderson's voice 3 decades earlier. "Danny," he said, "you need to get out here. Something's wrong with my cattle." I found them in the pasture, 12 head of cattle, all drained of blood, all with those 2 familiar puncture wounds in the neck. The creature had found another way out, or maybe it had been patient enough to dig its way through the rock. Either way, it was hunting again. But this time, I was ready. I'd spent 30 years learning everything I could about creatures like this. I'd talked to other rangers, other hunters, other men who'd faced things that shouldn't exist, and I'd learned that the Bible was just the beginning. There were other weapons, other ways to fight back. I never found the creature's new lair. It was smarter now, more careful. It moved its feeding grounds regularly, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. But I kept watching, kept hunting, kept protecting the families in my territory. Now I'm 68 years old, and I'm training my son Tommy to take over my job. He thinks I'm getting paranoid in my old age, always checking the caves, always carrying extra ammunition and a Bible. But I know what's out there. I know it's still hunting, still feeding, still waiting for its chance to take revenge on the man who drove it away. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is still and the forest is too silent, I can hear it calling to me. The same voice that threatened me in that cave 30 years ago, promising that it will find me and my family, promising that it will make me watch as it drains the life from everyone I love. But I'm not afraid anymore. I've seen the face of evil, and I've learned that it can be fought. Not easily, and not without cost, but it can be fought. Faith is stronger than fear, light is stronger than darkness, and sometimes that's enough. The creature is still out there, somewhere in the darkness beyond the reach of our lights. It's still hunting, still feeding, still waiting for its chance to reclaim the territory it considers its own. But as long as there are men like me, men who know the truth and are willing to fight, it will never be safe to hunt openly again. My grandfather was right about one thing: some stories need to be told, even if no one believes them, because the truth has a power all its own, and somewhere out there, someone else is going to need to know how to fight back when the creature comes calling. The beast of Pine Hollow is still alive, still hunting, still waiting, but so am I. End of story. My name is Patricia Drummond, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I spent 4 years in the Coast Guard before that, specializing in water rescue. I've pulled bodies from lakes, rivers, and ocean waters. I've seen drowning victims, boat accidents, and diving mishaps. I thought I'd seen everything water could do to kill a person. I was wrong. The Adirondack State Park covers 6 million acres of mountains, forests, and lakes. My section includes some of the deepest lakes in New York State, connected by underground cave systems that stretch for miles. Most tourists stick to the main beaches and boat launches, the smart ones, anyway. July 1973 was our busiest month on record. Families came from New York City to escape the summer heat. Kids splashed in the shallows, while parents grilled hot dogs and drank beer. Everything seemed normal until the fog started showing up. At first, nobody paid attention. Fog happens on lakes, but this fog was different. It rolled in during clear, sunny days when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Thick, white walls of mist that swallowed boats whole. Weather Service couldn't explain it, neither could I. Probably just temperature differences, I told myself. Lakes can be strange that way. The Henderson family arrived on July 15th. Mom, Dad. For kids aged 6 to 14, they rented a campsite near the boat launch and planned to stay a week. Nice family. The kind that follows safety rules and wears life jackets. Mr. Henderson asked me about the best fishing spots. Try the North Cove, I told him, but stay in the shallows with the kids. Some of these lakes drop off real sudden. He nodded and thanked me. That was Tuesday morning. By Wednesday evening, they were gone. I found their canoe floating empty, near the center of the lake. No damage, no signs of struggle. Life jackets still folded neatly in the bow. The water was dead calm, like glass. Weather had been perfect all day. 6 people don't just vanish from a canoe in calm water. They especially don't leave their life jackets behind when they do it. I called it in to state police and started search procedures. Dragged the lake bottom with sonar. That's when things got really strange. The depth finder showed structures down there. Big ones. At 200 feet deep, I was picking up what looked like buildings or caves. But according to every geological survey ever done, there were no caves at that depth. The lake bottom should have been flat sand and rock. My compass started spinning when I got near the center of the lake. Radio picked up voices that sounded like they were coming from underwater. Garbled words I couldn't understand, but definitely human voices. That night, I sat in my cabin and stared at the sonar printouts. 12 years of ranger work, 4 years in the Coast Guard, and I'd never seen anything like it. Part of me wanted to call in sick the next day and let someone else handle it. But 6 people were missing. A whole family. If they were down there, somewhere, trapped in an air pocket or injured on some hidden shore, every hour mattered. I decided to dive Thursday morning. I suited up in full scuba gear. Water temperature at the surface was normal for July, around 70 degrees. But as I went deeper, it got warmer instead of colder. At 50 feet, it felt like bath water. At 80 feet, I found something impossible. An air-filled chamber, a pocket of space in the middle of the lake where I could surface and breathe. Physics says that can't happen. Water pressure at that depth should collapse any airspace. But there I was, bobbing in an underground lake inside the main lake. The Henderson family was there, all 6 of them, floating face down in the air pocket. They'd drowned in a space filled with breathable air. I checked each body. All showed signs of drowning, water in the lungs, foam around the mouth. But how do you drown while floating in air? Their skin had strange burns too, like acid damage. Small holes eaten right through their clothes and into their flesh. The chamber connected to tunnels that stretched in every direction. My flashlight beam disappeared into dark passages that seemed to go on forever. The water in the chamber wasn't lake water anymore. It was thicker, almost oily, and it burned my exposed skin. I grabbed the 2 smallest kids and headed for the surface. Had to make 3 trips to bring them all up. By the time I finished, my wetsuit was dissolved in places and my skin was covered in chemical burns. The state police took the body. Coroner ruled it drowning, but couldn't explain the burns or how they'd gotten into that underwater chamber. Probably an old mining cave, he said, filled with runoff chemicals. But I knew better. Those tunnels weren't made by miners. They were too smooth, too round, like something big had carved them by moving through the rock over and over again. Kevin McCready joined me the next week, marine biologist from Albany, sent to investigate the unusual cave system. Good diver, smart guy. He listened when I told him about the burns and the warm water. Could be some kind of geothermal activity, he said, chemicals leaching up from deep rock formations. We went down together on Monday. Kevin brought water testing equipment and underwater cameras. I brought a bigger flashlight and more air tanks. The chamber was different, bigger. The tunnels had changed too, branching off in new directions. Kevin took water samples while I mapped the passages with rope and markers. That's when we saw it move. Something huge glided past the tunnel mouth. Just a shadow at first, then the massive curve of a body thicker than a telephone pole. It moved like a snake, but no snake ever grew 60 feet long. Kevin grabbed my arm and pointed. His eyes were wide behind his diving mask. We both saw the same thing, a creature the size of a subway car, swimming through tunnels it had carved in solid rock. We surfaced fast, too fast. Kevin got the bends and spent 2 days in a decompression chamber. When he could talk again, he said one word, serpent. The attacks started the next weekend. First was a teenage girl from Connecticut, swimming near the boat launch when something pulled her under. Her friends said she just disappeared. There 1 second, gone the next. No splash, no scream. The water didn't even ripple. We found pieces of her swimsuit floating near the deep water. The fabric was dissolved like it had been dipped in battery acid. Then a fisherman in a rowboat. His boat was found drifting empty, but the bottom was eaten away. Perfect round holes melted right through fiberglass and wood. He was never found. Kevin and I went back down with underwater cameras. We had to know what we were dealing with. The creature was waiting for us. 60 feet of muscle and scale, with 3 distinct heads. Each head was different. One had crushing jaws like a crocodile, another had needle teeth like a shark, and the third had a mouth that seemed to be all throat, designed for swallowing things whole. It moved through the water like liquid lightning. Kevin tried to film it, but the creature grabbed him with one head, while the others circled us. I saw acid streaming from its skin, dissolving Kevin's diving gear. I hit it with my emergency flare gun. The magnesium flare burned even underwater, and the creature released Kevin with a sound like a steam engine. We made it to the surface, but Kevin was badly burned. The acid had eaten through his wetsuit and into his chest and arms. He lasted 3 days in the hospital before the burns got infected. Last thing he said to me was, "Don't let anyone else go in that water." But people kept swimming. Families on vacation don't listen to warnings about dangerous conditions. They see clear water and sunshine, and they want to cool off. The creature got smarter too. It learned to create fog banks to hide its hunting. Thick white mist would roll across the lake during bright daylight, and when it cleared, someone would be gone. Fish started acting strange. Schools of bass and pike began attacking swimmers in coordinated groups, like they were following orders. I watched through binoculars as hundreds of fish herded a family toward the deep water, nipping and pushing until they swam right into the fog. Only the parents made it out. Their 2 boys, ages 8 and 10, were pulled under right in front of them. I called for help. State police, environmental protection, even the Army Corps of Engineers. Everyone had an explanation. Algae bloom, chemical spill, unusual weather patterns. Nobody wanted to hear about a 60-foot lake monster with 3 heads. The creature became bolder. It started surfacing during attacks, letting people see it before it killed them. Witnesses described a giant snake with multiple heads, but officials dismissed them as panic and hysteria. By the end of July, 12 people were dead or missing. The lake should have been closed, but tourist money talks louder than safety. The local Chamber of Commerce pressured officials to keep the beaches open. That's when it killed an entire family at once. The Kowalski family from Buffalo. Mum, Dad, 3 teenage kids. They were swimming near the main beach in broad daylight when the fog rolled in. By the time it cleared, all 5 were gone. Their screams echoed across the water for almost 10 minutes before everything went quiet. I found them the next morning. What was left of them? The creature had dissolved them slowly, keeping them alive as long as possible. The eldest daughter had claw marks on her arms where she'd tried to climb out of the acid-filled chamber. That night, I stole dynamite from a construction site. If the officials wouldn't close the lake, I'd make them close it. I rigged depth charges with timer fuses and lowered them into the deepest part of the water. Enough explosives to cave in every tunnel and kill anything living down there. The creature had made its choice when it started hunting families. The charges went off at dawn. The explosion lifted a column of water 200 feet into the air and shattered windows in town 3 miles away. Every fish in the lake died instantly. The blast wave knocked me flat on the dock and ruptured both my eardrums, but it wasn't enough. The creature surfaced in the middle of the debris field, all 3 heads roaring like freight trains. 6 feet of prehistoric nightmare, with acid streaming from wounds along its body. 1 head was badly damaged from the explosives, hanging limp and useless, but the other 2 were very much alive and very angry. It came straight for me. I had one last idea, a desperate, probably suicidal idea, but people were dead because I hadn't stopped this thing sooner. The creature could control water, create currents and whirlpools to trap its prey, but it needed deep water to maneuver. In the shallows, it would be vulnerable. I used my ranger boat to drag it toward shore, staying just ahead of its snapping jaws. Acid spit hissed past my head and dissolved the boat's windshield. The propeller screamed as something grabbed it from below. When we reached the shallows, I jumped overboard and ran for the beach. The creature followed, pulling itself onto dry land with powerful coils. Its remaining heads swayed above me like cobras, deciding which one would make the killing strike. I had a flare gun with 1 shot left. Not enough to kill it, but maybe enough to buy time for the real plan. The old Iroquois stories Kevin had mentioned came back to me. The horned serpent was a guardian of deep water. It couldn't survive long, away from its domain. On land, it would weaken and eventually die. I ran deeper into the woods, and the creature followed. Its massive body crushed trees and carved trenches in the earth. But with each minute away from water, it moved slower. The acid stopped flowing from its wounds. Its roars became weaker. After an hour, it gave up the chase and retreated to the lake. But I'd proven something important. It could be hurt, and it could be driven away from its territory. The lake was finally closed the next day. Environmental disaster was the official reason. Toxic algae bloom that made the water unsafe for swimming or fishing. That was 30 years ago. The lake is still closed. I installed a sonar monitoring system that tracks movement in the deep water. The creature is still down there, but it's more careful now. It learned that surface hunting brings consequences. Every few years, someone ignores the warning signs and goes swimming anyway. Usually teenagers on a dare, or fishermen who think the restrictions don't apply to them. They disappear quietly, and their bodies are never found. I train new rangers in unusual water hazard protocols. I can't tell them the truth. They'd think I was crazy. But I can teach them to watch for temperature changes, unusual fish behavior, and mysterious fog banks. I can make sure they know which lakes to fear. The creature is old. The scales we found after the explosion carbon dated to over 500 years. It's patient too. It can wait decades for the right opportunity, the right victim. Sometimes I wonder if there are others. Other lakes with their own guardians, their own buried secrets. The Adirondacks have thousands of deep water bodies, most never properly surveyed or explored. But that's not my problem anymore. I retired last year and moved to Arizona. Desert country. The nearest lake is 200 miles away. I still have nightmares about the Henderson family floating in that impossible air pocket, about Kevin's burned and infected skin, about the Kowalski family's screams echoing across the water. The lake warden is still out there guarding its territory, waiting for the restrictions to be lifted, for tourism to return, for fresh victims to enter its domain. If you ever visit the Adirondacks, stay away from the closed lakes. The warning signs are there for a reason. Some waters are meant to remain undisturbed, and if you see fog rolling in on a clear day, get out of the water immediately. Trust me on this one. My name is Michael Harrison, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years. Before that, I spent 3 years jumping out of helicopters in Vietnam. I tell you this because what I'm about to share sounds crazy, and I need you to know I'm not some kid who jumps at shadows. I specialize in night patrol and anti-poaching work. Most folks think being a ranger means giving directions to tourists and putting out campfires. The real work happens after dark, when the mountains belong to things that don't want to be found. October 1983 was different from the start. The leaves had turned early that year, and by the third week, most of the trees were bare. The thick canopy that usually filtered moonlight was gone, leaving everything stark and exposed. But somehow, the darkness felt deeper than ever. I worked the Cataract Falls area mostly. It's 20 miles from the nearest road, all hiking trails and mountain hollows. The waterfall drops 200 feet over limestone cliffs, and the sound echoes through the valleys like thunder that never stops. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, it drowns out everything else. The first sign of trouble came from the old-timers in the valley communities. They started talking about something they called the devil monkey. I'd heard these stories before. Mountain folk have always had their tales. Usually, it's just bears or wildcats that get blown out of proportion. But this felt different. The fear in their voices was real. They said something was hunting for sport, not food. Something that enjoyed the kill. I've tracked plenty of problem animals over the years. Black bears that got too comfortable around campsites. The occasional cougar that wandered down from higher elevations. You learn to read the signs, scat tracks, claw marks on trees. Animals follow patterns. They have reasons for what they do. The reports coming in didn't follow any pattern I knew. Martha Keene runs the general store in Cosby. She's lived in these mountains for 60 years and doesn't scare easy. When she grabbed my arm last Tuesday and whispered about her nephew finding something wrong up near the falls, I listened. "It ain't natural, Michael," she said. Jimmy found trees twisted into knots 40 feet off the ground, rocks piled up in perfect circles, and the smell. ... She shuddered, like something died and came back wrong. I'd planned to check it out the next morning, but that night changed everything. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Solo backpacker overdue at the Cataract Falls trailhead. David Chen, 24, from Nashville. He'd registered for a 3-day solo camping trip. His girlfriend called when he didn't show up for dinner like he'd promised. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The temperature had dropped to just above freezing, and my breath made clouds in the beam of my flashlight. The trail up to Cataract Falls is steep and rocky, but I'd walked it hundreds of times. I could do it in my sleep. What I found at the campsite made me wish I was sleeping. David Chen's tent was still standing, but everything else was wrong. His sleeping bag was shredded and scattered across 50 feet of forest floor. His backpack hung from a tree branch 20 feet up, like someone had tossed it there without thinking. The body was worse. I've seen what bears do to people. I've seen car accidents and hunting accidents and war. This was different. David hadn't just been killed, he'd been played with. The blood trail led in circles around the campsite. Not random circles, but perfect ones, like someone had walked him round and around before. I counted 7 complete loops before the trail led to where I found him. What was left of him? The weird part wasn't the violence, it was the precision. His wallet sat on a flat rock, opened to his driver's license. His car keys hung from a branch at eye level. Someone had gone through his things carefully, almost respectfully, while doing unspeakable things to him. I called it in on my radio, but the signal was weak, this deep in the mountains. Dispatch could barely hear me. I told them to send a team at first light and started documenting the scene. That's when I saw the tracks. They started at the edge of the campsite, near the stream, bipedal, but wrong. The stride was too long, maybe 8 feet between steps. The depth suggested something heavy, but the prints themselves were almost delicate, like hands instead of feet. I followed them with my flashlight. They led to the base of the limestone cliff beside the waterfall. Then they went straight up, not up a slope or using handholds, straight up the sheer rock face like gravity didn't matter. 40 feet up the cliff, I could see claw marks gouged into the stone. Deep gouges, like someone had dragged steel knives across the rock. The marks were still fresh. Limestone dust glittered in my flashlight beam. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see and touch and explain. But standing there in the dark, looking at those impossible tracks, I felt something I hadn't felt since Vietnam. Pure, cold fear. The sound started just as I was about to head back to the campsite. A low rumble that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. At first, I thought it was just the waterfall, but this was different. Rhythmic, almost like breathing. I turned off my flashlight and listened. The breathing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Movement in the trees above me, not the random rustle of wind or small animals. Deliberate movement, something large working its way through the canopy. I clicked my light back on and swept the beam upward. The trees were tall here, old growth, oak and pine that stretched 60 feet into the darkness. The light caught something moving between the branches, a shadow that didn't belong. It was there for maybe 2 seconds before it vanished. But I saw enough, something the size of a man, but moving through the trees like a squirrel. Too fast, too agile, too wrong. I backed toward the campsite, keeping my light aimed up. The movement followed me, staying just at the edge of the beam. Whatever it was smart enough to avoid the direct light. When I reached David's tent, I heard it drop to the ground behind me. I spun around, and my light caught it full on. 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with arms that hung past its knees. The face was the worst part, almost human, but stretched wrong. The eyes reflected my light like an animal's, but there was something behind them. Intelligence, and worse than that, amusement. It looked at me for maybe 3 seconds. Then it smiled, showing teeth like broken glass, and melted back into the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to a tree and my .357 in my hand until the sun came up. When morning arrived, I found more tracks. The thing had circled the campsite all night, staying just out of sight, playing with me the same way it had played with David Chen. The recovery team arrived at dawn. Jim Patterson from the coroner's office took one look at the scene and went pale. Jesus, Mike, what kind of animal does this? I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. Bears don't arrange personal belongings. Bears don't walk in perfect circles. And bears sure as hell don't climb straight up cliff faces. Be a rogue bear, Patterson said, but his voice shook. Maybe rabid. Sometimes they act strange when they're sick. I nodded and let him believe it. The alternative was too crazy to say out loud. 2 days later, they sent me a partner. Catherine Stone, wildlife biologist with the state office. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of confidence that comes from textbooks and lab work. She'd never tracked anything that could think back. I've read the preliminary report, she said as we hiked back to the falls. The pattern suggests a large predator, probably a black bear exhibiting unusual aggressive behavior. We need to track it and assess the threat level. What if it's not a bear? I asked. She gave me a look like I'd suggested aliens. Then what do you think it is? I didn't answer. I'd spent 3 days trying to convince myself it was just a bear. The alternative kept me awake at night. We found the second campsite that afternoon. Rebecca Martinez, 28, from Atlanta. She'd been camping alone near Laurel Creek, about 3 miles from where David died. Her tent was intact, but she was gone. The blood trail was different this time. Instead of circles, it led in a straight line toward the creek. We followed it for maybe 100 yards before Stone grabbed my arm. Look at this, she whispered. The trail led to a fallen log that stretched across the creek. But instead of going around or under, it went over, 30 feet above the water, across a log barely 8 inches wide. No way a bear could do that, Stone said. We found Rebecca's body on the other side, arranged sitting against a tree like she was just resting. Her eyes were open, staring at the path like she was waiting for someone. Her camera was hanging around her neck. The last photo showed the forest around her campsite. In the background, barely visible between the trees, was a dark shape watching her. Stone studied the photo with a magnifying glass. "This can't be right," she muttered. "Look at the proportions. If this thing is as far away as it appears, it would have to be 8 feet tall." I finished. That night, we camped together. For safety, Stone insisted on taking the first watch, while I got some sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the waterfall and trying not to think about glowing eyes in the darkness. I woke up to Stone shaking me. "Mike, wake up, it's here." The fire had burned down to coals, casting just enough light to see the edge of our campsite. Beyond that, everything was black. Where I whispered, "It's been circling us for an hour," she said. "Watch the tree line." I stared into the darkness until my eyes watered. Just when I was about to give up, I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees, too tall and too quiet to be human. How long has it been doing this? Since midnight. It's not getting any closer, just ... watching. As if it heard us, the shadow stopped moving. For a long moment, everything was silent, except for the distant waterfall. Then it spoke. "Help me," it called in a voice like broken glass. "Please, someone help me." Stone grabbed my arm. The voice was coming from the trees, but it sounded like a young woman crying. "Please," the voice called again. "I'm hurt. I can't move." I stood up, reaching for my flashlight. Stone pulled me back down. "That's not human," she whispered. "Help me." The voice sobbed. "Please don't leave me here." It was Rebecca Martinez's voice. I'd heard her on the 911 call her sister had played. For me, same accent, same way of pronouncing her words. The thing was mimicking her. We sat in silence for another hour, listening to it call for help in the voices of the dead. First Rebecca, then David Chen, voices I'd never heard before. But Stone started crying when one of them called her name. At dawn, we found tracks all around our campsite. It had been close enough to touch our tent. 3 days later, Dr. Sarah Kellerman arrived from the university. She was a wildlife researcher who specialized in primate behavior. Young, brilliant, and absolutely convinced she could solve our problem with science. Based on the evidence, she told us over coffee, we're dealing with an undiscovered primate species, probably a descendant of Gigantopithecus that survived the Ice Age in these mountains. She had charts and graphs and theories about evolution and adaptation. Everything made perfect sense except for one thing. "What about the voices?" I asked. "Parrots mimic human speech," she said. "So do some other animals. This creature has probably been listening to humans for generations." "Parrots don't arrange personal belongings in neat piles," Stone said. Kellerman waved that away. "Tool use is common among advanced primates. Nest-building behavior could explain the organizational patterns." She wanted to study it, actually study it, like it was just another animal for her research. She had tranquilizer guns and tracking equipment and a whole plan for capturing it safely. We tried to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't listen. Scientists never do. The next morning, we found her camp destroyed. The tranquilizer gun was bent in half and tossed into the creek. Her research notes were scattered through the trees, each page carefully placed on a different branch. We found Dr. Kellerman at the bottom of Cataract Falls, 200 feet down. The current had battered her body against the rocks, but the coroner said she was already dead when she hit the water. Her neck was broken in 3 places. Something had picked her up and snapped her spine like a twig. That night, Stone didn't come back from patrol. I found Catherine Stone's body the next morning, arranged like a scarecrow in the middle of the trail. Her arms were spread wide, held up by branches that had been carefully woven through her clothes. Her head was tilted to one side, and her eyes were open, staring down the path like a warning, like it was telling me this was my fault. I'd led 3 people to their deaths, chasing something I didn't understand. The smart thing would have been to call for backup, evacuate the area, and let someone else handle it. But I couldn't do that. Not after what it did to Stone. This thing wasn't just killing people. It was enjoying it, playing games with them, before it struck. And now it was playing games with me. I spent the day preparing, checked my weapons, studied maps of the area, and tried to think like a hunter instead of prey. In Vietnam, we'd learned that the enemy wasn't always human, but they always had weaknesses. Everything could be killed if you knew how. The tracks led to a cave system behind the falls. I'd explored these caves before, but never this deep. The Passages twisted and branched like a maze, leading back into the mountain for miles. The smell hit me first. Rotting meat mixed with something else, something chemical and wrong, like bleach mixed with decay. The cave opened into a larger chamber, maybe 50 feet across. My flashlight beam picked out shapes arranged along the walls. At first, I thought they were rock formations. Then I realized what I was looking at. Trophies, dozens of them. Backpacks, cameras, jewelry, wallets, all arranged in neat rows like a museum display. Some of the items looked old, faded and worn, like they'd been here for years. This thing had been hunting people for a long time. At the back of the chamber, I found bones, human bones, picked clean and sorted by type. Skulls in one pile, ribs in another, leg bones stacked like cordwood. A sound echoed through the cave behind me, breathing, slow and deliberate. I turned around, and it was there, 8 feet tall, covered in matted black hair, arms that hung past its knees, ending in hands tipped with claws like ivory knives. The face was the worst part, almost human, but stretched and twisted into something that shouldn't exist. It stood in the entrance to the chamber, blocking my way out. In the beam of my flashlight, its eyes glowed like hot coals. "Michael," it said in Catherine Stone's voice, "why did you let me die?" I raised my .357 and fired 3 shots center, mass. The bullets hit it in the chest, and I heard them punch through flesh. It staggered back a step, then looked down at the wounds with what looked like mild interest. Black blood seeped through its fur, but it didn't fall. It didn't even seem hurt. "David called for help," it said, switching to David Chen's voice. "You didn't come fast enough." I fired 3 more shots, aiming for the head this time. 2 missed, in the darkness, but the third caught it in the shoulder. It spun around from the impact, then straightened up and smiled. "Rebecca screamed your name," it said in Rebecca's voice. "She thought you would save her." I was out of bullets. The thing took a step forward, then another. Its claws scraped against the stone floor. That's when I remembered. The dynamite, I'd brought it to clear rock falls from the trails, but it would work just as well for collapsing a cave. The charges were in my pack, with enough explosive to bring down half the mountain. The creature seemed to sense what I was thinking. It rushed forward with inhuman speed, covering the distance between us in 2 massive bounds. I rolled to the side, pulling the first charge from my pack. The fuse was only 30 seconds, barely enough time to get clear if I was lucky. The thing's claws raked across my back as I dove behind a rock formation. I felt my jacket tear and warm blood running down my spine. I lit the fuse and threw the dynamite as far as I could. 25 seconds. The creature was on me again, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. Its claws dug into my shoulders, and I could smell its breath, rotten meat, and something else, something that made my eyes water. 20 seconds. I pulled the second charge and lit it. The creature saw what I was doing and threw me against the cave wall. I felt ribs crack, and my vision went black for a moment. 15 seconds. I couldn't see the dynamite in the darkness, but I could hear the fuse sparking. The creature could hear it too. It looked around frantically, finally understanding what was about to happen. 10 seconds. It ran for the cave entrance, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I dragged myself toward the nearest passage, hoping it would provide some protection from the blast. 5 seconds. The world exploded. The first charge went off like thunder trapped in a bottle. The second one followed a heartbeat later. The cave ceiling cracked and started to fall, huge chunks of limestone crashing down like the mountain was collapsing. I crawled deeper into the passage as rocks rained down behind me. The air filled with dust and the sound of the mountain tearing itself apart. When the noise finally stopped, I was alone in the dark with a broken flashlight and the taste of blood in my mouth. It took me 6 hours to find another way out. The official report blamed the deaths on an aggressive black bear. The cave collapse was listed as a natural geological event unrelated to the fatalities. The area around Cataract Falls was closed to camping for the rest of the season. I never saw the creature's body. The cave-in was too complete, too deep to excavate. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I wonder if those explosives were enough. I've been back to the falls a dozen times since then. I installed motion sensors along the main trails, military-grade equipment that can detect movement from a quarter mile away. Most of the time, they pick up deer or hikers. but occasionally something sets them off that doesn't show up on the cameras, something too fast to photograph. The old-timers in the valley still tell stories about the devil monkey. They say it's learned to be more careful, more selective. Solo campers still disappear during new moon periods, but not as often, and never when I'm patrolling the area. I think it remembers me. I think it's waiting. Last month, I found fresh claw marks on a tree near Laurel Creek, gouges in the bark 6 inches deep, too precise to be from any normal animal. The marks were arranged in a pattern, 3 parallel lines repeated 7 times. It's trying to tell me something. I'm 56 years old now. I've got arthritis in my knees, and my back isn't what it used to be. In a few years, I'll have to retire, and some young ranger will take over my territory. I worry about what will happen then. The mountains are old, older than human memory. Things live in the deep places that were here before we built our first fire. Most of them stay hidden, content to exist in the spaces between our world and theirs, but some of them like to hunt. I keep detailed records now, patrol routes, incident reports, sensor data, everything the next ranger will need to keep people safe. I've trained him as much as I can without sounding crazy, but training only goes so far. Some things you have to learn for yourself, usually when it's too late to matter. My name is Michael Harrison, and I've been guarding these mountains for 20 years. I've seen things that would make most people question their sanity. I've fought something that shouldn't exist and lived to tell about it. The thing about monsters is that they're patient. They can wait longer than human lifespans. They remember every slight, every injury, every moment of pain, and they never forgive. Sometimes, when I'm walking the trails at night, I can feel eyes watching from the darkness. I'll stop and listen, and the forest will go quiet. Too quiet. Even the insects stop singing. That's when I know it's out there, waiting, learning, planning its revenge. The mountains keep their secrets, but they don't keep them forever. Someday, someone will find that collapsed cave. They'll dig deeper than they should, looking for answers to questions they shouldn't ask. And when they do, they'll discover that some things are better left buried. Until then, I keep walking the dark trails, listening for sounds that don't belong, watching for shadows that move wrong. It's not much, but it's all I can do. Because somewhere in these ancient mountains, something is waiting for me to get old, to get slow, to make a mistake. And when that day comes, I'll be ready. I just hope I'm still fast enough to matter. My name is Robert Flint, and I've been a forest ranger for 22 years. I've seen plenty of strange things in these woods, but nothing like what happened in March of 1959. Nothing that still wakes me up at night. 40 years later, I work the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona, up on the Mogollon Rim where the high desert meets the pine trees. It's beautiful country, but it's old country too. My grandfather used to tell me stories about this place. He was Apache, and he always said the forest had guardians watching over the sacred spots. Back then, I figured it was just old tribal stories. I should have listened better. The winter of '59 was harsh, and by March, the snowmelt was coming fast. Flash flood warnings were up all over the county. That's when Dr. Martin Westbrook and his team from the university showed up to dig around the old cliff dwellings. They had permits, all legal and proper, but something about it didn't sit right with me. This is a burial ground, I told Westbrook. When I met him at the dig site, the Apache people consider it sacred. He was a thin man with wire glasses and soft hands that had never done real work. Mr. Flint, we're scientists. We're here to preserve history, not destroy it. But that's not how it felt when I watched them set up their equipment near the ancient stone walls. The air seemed heavier somehow. Even the birds went quiet. I'd been assigned as their archaeological protection and tribal liaison officer. Part of my job was keeping the peace between the researchers and the local Apache community. The other part was making sure nobody got hurt in the wilderness. I failed at both. The burial site was tucked into a canyon wall about 800 years old, according to the university folks. Ancient people had carved rooms right into the rock face, and some of those rooms held the remains of their dead. The Apache elders had protested the dig from the start, but Washington overruled them. Science came first, they said. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head every time I visited the site. Some places are meant to sleep. Bobby, wake them up, and they might wake up angry. The dig had been going on for 2 weeks, when I started noticing things. Little things at first. Animals acting strange. Deer running from areas they usually grazed. Birds flying in weird patterns, like they were confused or scared. Even my horse, Thunder, got nervous whenever we rode near the canyon. Dr. Westbrook didn't care about any of that. He was excited about what they were finding. Pottery shards, tools, bits of jewelry. We're uncovering an entire civilization. He told me one afternoon, his eyes bright with the fever that takes some people when they think they're making history. I tried to explain about the Apache concerns, about respect for the dead, but he just waved me off. Superstition, he said. We're doing important work here. The graduate students were different. There were two of them, Sarah and Tom, both young and eager but also respectful. They asked me about the local history, about the Apache traditions. They seemed to understand that this wasn't just about old bones and broken pottery, but it was too late for understanding. Something was already stirring in those ancient rooms carved into the stone. Something that had been sleeping for centuries was starting to wake up. The first sign came on a Tuesday night. I was making my evening rounds when I found the excavation tools scattered around the dig site. Shovels, brushes, measuring equipment. All of it thrown around like a child having a tantrum. But these weren't light tools. Some of them weighed 50 pounds or more. Dr. Westbrook was furious. Vandals, he said. Probably some of those protesters from the reservation. I looked at the tools more carefully. They weren't just scattered, they were arranged in a pattern. A circle around the main excavation site, with all the handles pointing inward toward the ancient burial chambers. That's when I started to get really worried. I called in Joseph Yellowhorse the next morning. Joe was full-blood Apache and knew more about the old ways than anyone I'd met. He was also a deputy sheriff, so he understood both sides of the law, the kind written in books and the kind written in the bones of the earth. "This is bad, Bobby," he said after I showed him around the site. "Real bad." Joe crouched down next to the excavation pit and touched the dirt with his fingertips. "They've gone too deep. Past the sleeping rooms, down into the deep places." "What deep places?" "The rooms where they put the medicine men, the ones who were supposed to watch over this place even after death." I felt cold despite the morning sun. "Joe, that's just look at the earth," he interrupted. "Look at it, really look." I looked. The soil around the dig site was darker than it should be, almost black. And it felt different under my boots, softer, like it was breathing. That's when we heard Sarah screaming. We ran toward the sound, coming from the main excavation tent. Inside, we found her standing frozen, pointing at something in the dig pit. Tom was beside her, his face white as paper. In the pit, arranged in a perfect line, were 6 human skulls. Not ancient ones, these still had bits of flesh clinging to them. Fresh skulls, placed with care along the edge of the burial chamber. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I recognized them. "Those are Dr. Westbrook's team," I whispered. The senior researchers, all 6 of the lead archaeologists who had been working the site, were dead. Their bodies were nowhere to be seen, but their skulls had been placed in the pit they'd been digging, facing east according to Apache tradition. "We need to get out of here," Joe said quietly. "Right now." But Sarah was still staring into the pit. "How is this possible? They were here this morning. I saw Dr. Westbrook at breakfast." I looked around the tent. The excavation equipment was arranged in neat piles. The research notes were stacked and organized. Everything was clean and orderly, like someone had been tidying up. Someone had filled in most of the dig site overnight. Tons of earth had been moved back into the excavation holes, and artifacts that had been removed were now back in their original positions. But the work was too perfect, too precise. It would have taken a team of construction workers with heavy equipment to move that much dirt. The only footprints in the soft earth around the site weren't human. They were massive, nearly 20 inches long, with 6 clear toe marks. The prints were deep, pressed into the ground by something that weighed at least 400 or 500 pounds. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs, but the foot shape was wrong. Too wide, too primitive. Joe knelt beside one of the prints and shook his head. "Kiwak," he said softly. "What? That's what my grandmother called it. The one who watches, the one who keeps the sacred places safe." I stared at the footprint. It was fresh, probably made just hours before. "Joe, this is impossible. A lot of impossible things used to be possible, Bobby, before we forgot how to see them." We spent the rest of the morning looking for the bodies of the dead researchers, but found nothing. No blood, no signs of violence, no drag marks. It was like they had simply vanished, leaving only their skulls behind as a warning. The graduate students packed up their gear and left that afternoon. Sarah was crying, and Tom couldn't stop shaking. I didn't blame them. I wanted to leave too, but Joe stayed with me. "Someone needs to witness this," he said. "Someone needs to remember." That night, we camped near the dig site and waited. We both carried guns, though I had a feeling they wouldn't do much good against whatever we were dealing with. Around midnight, we heard it moving through the forest. Heavy footsteps, careful and deliberate, branches breaking, the sound of stone scraping against stone. And then we saw it. 9 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair, with arms that hung almost to its knees. It walked upright like a man, but everything about it was wrong. Too big, too strong, too aware. Its eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's, but there was intelligence there. Ancient intelligence. It was carrying something in its massive hands, stone tools, carved and shaped with impossible skill. Not crude implements, but carefully crafted implements that looked like they could cut through steel. The creature stopped at the edge of the dig site and looked directly at us. Not at our hiding place, but at us. It knew exactly where we were. Then it began to work. What I saw that night changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The creature, I couldn't think of it as anything else, moved with purpose and intelligence. It carefully examined every part of the excavation site, touching the disturbed earth with its massive hands. Where the archaeologists had dug, it began to repair. But this wasn't just filling in holes. The creature was restoring the burial site exactly as it had been before. It moved tons of earth with its bare hands, placing each stone and artifact back in its original position. The work that had taken Dr. Westbrook's team weeks to accomplish, this thing undid in a single night. Joe whispered Apache words under his breath, prayers, I think. "It's fixing what we broke," I said. "No," Joe replied. "It's fixing what we violated." The creature worked for hours, and we watched in fascination and terror. It used tools that looked ancient but cut through stone like butter. When it needed to move a boulder that 3 men couldn't lift, it simply grabbed it and placed it where it belonged. But the most unsettling thing was how careful it was. This wasn't mindless destruction or random violence. Every movement was deliberate, respectful. It was conducting a restoration, returning the sacred site to its proper state. When dawn came, the creature melted back into the forest like mist. The excavation site looked exactly as it had before Dr. Westbrook's team arrived, except for one thing. The skulls were gone. I radioed for backup that morning, but I didn't know what to tell them. How do you explain that a 9-foot-tall creature had undone weeks of archaeological work in a single night? How do you describe something that shouldn't exist? The answer came from the university. Dr. Westbrook's team had been found. They were arranged in a circle around an ancient burial chamber deeper in the canyon, each one positioned according to Apache funeral customs. Their bodies showed no signs of violence, no wounds or trauma. They looked like they had simply laid down and died, but the positioning was deliberate, traditional. It was as if someone who understood Apache burial practices had arranged them as a warning to other grave robbers. "Whoever did this knows our ways," Joe said as we examined the scene. "Knows them better than most living Apache." More investigators arrived at afternoon. Federal agents, more archaeologists, even some military personnel. They set up a command post and began treating the area like a crime scene. I tried to tell them about the creature, about the footprints and the restoration work. They listened politely and wrote everything down, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. That changed when the creature started fighting back. The new archaeological team was bigger and better equipped. They brought in heavy machinery, generators. They were going to excavate the entire canyon wall, sacred burial chambers and all. The creature let them set up their equipment. It let them bring in their dozers and their drilling equipment. It even let them start working. But when they broke into the first deep burial chamber, when they disturbed remains that had been sleeping for 800 years, that's when it got angry. I was a quarter-mile away when the earth started shaking. Not an earthquake. This was different, more controlled. The ground rose and fell in waves, like the earth itself was breathing. Joe and I ran toward the dig site and found chaos. The heavy equipment was buried under tons of rock and soil. The generators were crushed. Floodlights were scattered like toys. But again, no one was killed. The workers had been thrown clear, knocked unconscious, but not seriously hurt. It was like the creature had calculated exactly how much force to use without causing death. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, the new team leader, was furious. "This is sabotage," she said. "Someone's using explosives to destroy our work." But there was no evidence of explosives, no chemical residue, no blast patterns. The earth had simply moved, as if commanded by something with the power to control the very ground we stood on. That night, Joe tried to communicate with the creature. He went to the edge of the excavation site and spoke in Apache, using the old words his grandmother had taught him. He offered tobacco and corn pollen, traditional gifts of respect. For a long time, nothing happened. Then we heard movement in the darkness beyond our lights. The creature emerged from the shadows, moving more cautiously than before. It approached the gifts Joe had left and examined them carefully. Then it looked at Joe and made a sound, not quite human speech, but definitely communication. Joe responded in Apache, and for several minutes they seemed to be having a conversation. The creature's voice was deep and rough, like stone grinding against stone. But there was intelligence in the sounds it made. Finally, Joe turned to me. "It wants the violations to stop. It wants the sacred places to be left alone. Can you tell it we'll leave, that we'll pack up and go?" Joe translated, but the creature shook its massive head. It pointed toward the federal command post, where Dr. Martinez and her team were planning their next assault on the burial chambers. "It knows they won't stop," Joe said. "It knows they'll keep coming back." The creature looked directly at me then, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. It was like being examined by something infinitely old and patient, something that had watched over this place since before my grandfather's grandfather was born. Then it spoke one word in perfect English: "Choose." I knew what the creature meant. I had to choose between my duty as a federal officer and my responsibility to the sacred places of my grandfather's people. The choice became clearer the next morning when Dr. Martinez announced her new plan. They were going to use dynamite to blast open the deeper burial chambers. "If we can't excavate carefully," she said, "we'll excavate quickly." I tried to reason with her. "Dr. Martinez, this is a sacred site. The Apache people have asked us to stop." "The Apache people don't own this land anymore," she replied coldly. "The federal government does, and we have our orders." Joe and I were standing guard that evening when the creature made its final approach. But this time, it wasn't alone. The forest around us came alive. Trees creaked and swayed without wind. Roots pushed up through the ground, creating barriers around the dig site. Thorn bushes grew to impossible heights in minutes, forming walls of spikes. And through it all, the creature walked calmly toward the federal command post. Dr. Martinez ordered her security team to open fire. The bullets hit the creature but seemed to have no effect. It didn't even slow down. Instead, it raised one massive hand, and the earth responded. The ground beneath the command post cracked and split. Equipment fell into sudden sinkholes. Vehicles were swallowed by the earth. The creature wasn't just strong, it could control the very landscape. "It's not just an animal," I said to Joe. "It's something else, something that's part of the forest itself. It's a guardian," Joe replied. The old stories were right. Some places choose their own protectors. The creature reached the main excavation site where Dr. Martinez was frantically trying to set up her demolition charges. She was determined to blast open the deepest burial chamber before the creature could stop her. "This is for science," she screamed at the approaching giant. "For human knowledge." The creature paused and looked at her. Then it spoke, its voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "Some knowledge is not meant for humans." Dr. Martinez triggered her explosives. The blast echoed through the canyon, and for a moment I thought she had succeeded. Smoke and debris filled the air. When it cleared, I could see that the burial chamber had been opened, revealing ancient remains that had slept in darkness for centuries. But the creature was unharmed. The explosion had passed through it like it was made of smoke. Now it was truly angry. The earth began to shake with real violence. Boulders the size of houses rolled down from the canyon walls. The ground cracked open in long fissures. Trees twisted and bent like they were in a hurricane. Dr. Martinez ran toward her escape vehicle, but the creature gestured casually, and the ground beneath her feet opened up. She fell into a perfectly circular hole, and before she could climb out, stone walls rose around her, trapping her in an earthen prison. "Please," she called out. "I was just doing my job." The creature looked down at her and spoke one word: "Choose." Then it began to fill in the hole. I couldn't watch. I couldn't let it happen, even if she had violated every sacred law I'd ever learned about. "Stop," I shouted, running toward the creature. "She doesn't understand. She's not from here." The creature turned to me, and I saw something in its ancient eyes that might have been sadness. "She chose to violate the sacred places," it said. "She chose to disturb the sleeping dead. But she didn't know what she was doing. Ignorance is not innocence." I looked at the trapped archaeologist, then at Joe, then back at the creature. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "Some places are meant to sleep, Bobby." Finally, I made my choice. I walked to where Dr. Martinez was trapped and knelt beside the earthen walls. In the Apache language my grandfather had taught me, I spoke the words for asking forgiveness from the spirits of the dead. The creature watched me carefully. When I finished speaking, it nodded once and gestured toward the trapped woman. The earth walls crumbled, freeing her. "But she must leave," the creature said. "All of them must leave, and they must not return." Dr. Martinez scrambled out of the hole and ran for her life. Within an hour, the entire federal operation was packing up and pulling out. They left so fast, they abandoned most of their equipment. The creature and I stood alone in the restored burial ground as the sun set behind the canyon walls. "Why did you spare her?" I asked. "Because you chose respect over duty. You chose the old ways over the new laws. What happens now?" The creature looked at the ancient cliff dwellings, now peaceful again in the evening light. "Now the sacred places sleep again, and I watch over them. Will I see you again? When the sacred places are threatened, you will see me. When the old laws are broken, you will see me. When someone needs to choose between respect and violation, you will see me." Then it walked back into the forest and disappeared among the shadows of the ancient trees. That was 40 years ago, and I'm telling this story now because things are changing again. New development projects, new archaeological expeditions, new people who think they can take whatever they want from the sacred places. Dr. Martinez never spoke publicly about what happened that night. The federal government classified the entire incident and sealed the files. Officially, the archaeological expedition was terminated due to environmental concerns. But I know the truth, and so does Joe, though he passed away 10 years ago. Before he died, he made me promise to keep watching over the sacred places, to be the bridge between the old ways and the new world. I became a different kind of ranger. After that night, I studied Apache traditions, learned the old languages, spent time with the elders. I made sure that any new projects in the forest respected the sacred sites, and sometimes, when developers or treasure hunters or scientists pushed too hard, when they ignored the warnings and violated the sacred places, I would find evidence of the creature's presence. Equipment moved, boundaries restored, warnings left for those who knew how to read them. The forest guardian is still out there, still watching, still protecting the places that are meant to sleep. A few months ago, my grandson asked me about the old stories. He's studying archaeology in college, and he wanted to know about the sacred sites in the forest. I told him what my grandfather told me. Some places are meant to sleep, wake them up, and they might wake up angry. He laughed and said, "Grandpa, that's just superstition." I looked at him and saw myself at his age, full of certainty about what was possible and what wasn't. "Maybe," I said. "But if you ever find yourself in those sacred places, if you ever feel like you're being watched, remember to show respect. Remember to choose carefully." Last week, I heard rumors of a new mining operation planned for the canyon where the burial chambers rest. The company has permits, all legal and proper. They say they'll be careful, that they'll respect the cultural sites. But I've heard those promises before. I'm too old now to patrol the forest like I used to. My legs can't handle the rough terrain, and my eyes aren't what they were. But I still drive out there sometimes, just to check on things. And sometimes, in the evening light, I see footprints in the soft earth, 20 inches long, with 6 clear toe marks. Deep prints made by something that weighs 400 or 500 pounds. The forest guardian is still there, still watching over the sacred places, still waiting for people to choose respect over violation, still ready to enforce the old laws when the new ones fail. I'm telling this story now because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know that there are places in this world that belong to something older and wiser than human ambition. Someone needs to know that the guardians are still out there, watching and waiting. And someone needs to understand that when you disturb the sacred places, when you wake up what's meant To sleep, you don't get to choose the consequences. The forest chooses for you. My name is Robert Flint, and I've been a forest ranger for over 40 years. I've seen things that most people wouldn't believe, and I've learned that the old stories are sometimes the truest ones of all. The next time you're in the deep woods, in the sacred places where the ancient people rest, remember to show respect. Remember to tread lightly, and if you hear heavy footsteps in the darkness, if you see massive prints in the soft earth, if you feel the presence of something ancient and powerful watching from the shadows, remember to choose carefully. The forest guardian is still out there, and it's still keeping the sacred places safe.